Okay, this is the third session. Again, reading from my note card to replace computer printout, which we're still working on the computer systems. So the first two sessions of this class, we talked about communication in the first class. We talked about and how not to communicate, essentially. And last week we talked about disagreements, how to manage disagreements. Not necessarily how to avoid them, they're not always avoidable. And not necessarily how to win them, because they're not always winnable. Nor is it always advisable to even try to win. That's not how we measure success. We measure success by whether you handled the situation right. Sometimes it's not necessary to win a disagreement to be the winner, if you know what I mean. You can surrender the battle but win the war. And the real ultimate goal has to be to establish harmony and to keep a good relationship, not necessarily for the specific disagreement to be resolved one way or the other. And not all disagreements need to be resolved. We went through all of this last time. So we've built up a foundation. We've talked about respecting one another. We've talked about how not to call names and how not to be reactive and not to be defensive. Lots of nots. But what I'd like to conclude with in the third session is to get into some more positive. What can you do? We talked a lot about what not to do. There's a lot of things not to do. But what you don't do does not make a relationship. So like the Ramban says very beautifully in the Chumash, he talks about why do we have a principle in the Torah, aseh doche lo ta'aseh. A positive mitzvah overrides a negative mitzvah. He says because a negative is what you don't do. You can't build a relationship with Hashem on not do. What you do is really what defines who you are, not what you don't do. So, yes, it's true there are certain things that you shouldn't do, and if you do them, it will ruin your relationship with Hashem, or it will ruin your relationship with another person. But more importantly, ultimately, are the positive and proactive things that you can do to further the relationship. Because if you define, if somebody asks you, why do you have a good marriage? And you say, because we don't do this, and we don't do this, and we don't do this, that's not much of you don't really have much to show for it yourself. You didn't say when you decided to get married or in any relationship or in any friendship, why am I friends with him? Because we don't fight, we don't have bad disagreements, we don't call each other names. That's not a reason to be friends or to be married. There has to be a positive. So I'd like to get into just a few items tonight that we can focus on in terms of proactive. Number one in proactive, and you'll see that a lot of this is kind of the flip side to, or another side of the coin of things that we've talked about in the previous two sessions. One of them is getting to know your partner. That could be your spouse, that could be your friend, it could be anybody, but getting to know them. What do they like? What do they not like? What are their interests? Now, personally, as a man, I have certain limitations in my ability to understand what my wife likes. For example, shiny rocks on a finger don't appeal to me. I don't understand why they appeal to anybody, or why any other shiny metal hanging on ears, noses, or fingers is of any significance or value. However, I know that my wife thinks it's very important. So therefore, it behooves a person to know what their wife thinks is important or what their husband thinks is important, and to try to appreciate it and get to know it and to understand it and to learn about it as much as possible and to show interest in it. It's not that you need to feign interest, but if you love another person, you should also care about what they care about. Not because you have an independent interest in that subject, because you want to be a geologist, for example, in this case, but because you are interested in the person and you want to understand them and what it means to them. What does the jewelry mean to them? What is important about? What do they like in jewelry? What do they not like? These are ways to get to know the person. And of course, you'll never find someone who doesn't like to talk about what's near and dear to their heart. Right? And start talking with a baseball fan about baseball. Start talking about a martial artist about martial arts. Start talking about clothes with someone who's into fashion, and they will talk your ear off for hours. They love to talk about whatever's dear to their hearts. So this is also a way to stimulate conversation, and it shows, you know what, I'm interested in you. I remember one time, when I was a teenager, my parents used to work, even into my adulthood, my parents continued to work for the yeshiva high school for the bingo game that they had 3 times a week, and my parents used to run it. My mother used to run the concession stand, and my father used to help run the actual game to raise money for the yeshiva. They did that for 15 years or something like that. And there was one night that a lady came with her husband to bingo and ordered a coffee, and she asked her husband, "How do you take your coffee?" And I said, "You don't know how your own husband takes his coffee? That's strange. They weren't newlyweds, Now that's just a highlight. That's just an example. Obviously, knowing how your spouse or your significant other or your friend takes their coffee is not necessarily the most important thing to know about them. However, if you have a close relationship with someone, we expect that you pay attention to the details of what they like, what they don't like, what they're interested in, what they're not interested in, so that you can engage them on their level. Think about kids as another example. A child has their own constellation of interests, likes and dislikes. And if you try to change those to what you like, that's not going to work. You have to engage in what they like. What happened in school today? What was interesting? What do you have to tell me? They might tell you blah, blah, blah. My friend did this and that. You're like, no, I want to know what happened in math class. Well, I don't care about math class. I care about what Shmuel did to Reuven in the playground. That's what they want to talk about. So you have to get what they're interested in and where their mind is. It's number one, a way of learning and understanding them better, and therefore you can be a better friend, you can be a better partner. If you understand your partner better, you can be a better one. That's always true. Anything you understand better, you'll be better. If you're a doctor and you understand the human body better, you're going to be better. Okay? If you are, whatever you are, if you're an engineer and you understand physics better, you're going to be a better engineer. And if you are a spouse and you understand your spouse better, you'll be a better spouse. Just by definition, by nature, you will be able to love them better and care for them better. That's reality. Now, but beyond that, you also, by engaging them, show them your interest, show them respect, show them love, through the very act of asking about it, engaging them about it. And they say, hey, he wants to know about what I think about fashion or about jewelry or about that, whatever. I'm picking totally stereotypic things. I apologize. I know you're a lawyer and everything. I'm just trying to figure out something that's very unmanly, okay, and not typical for a man to ask about. I don't know, makeup, whatever. Showing interest in that. Or in my case, if I were to start asking about cooking, for example, which is something that I don't know anything about and have not, but my wife takes care of it in our household, but that's not true for all men. Some men cook. I'm just saying I don't. I only eat. I don't cook. But, if I were to ask about that, I'm sure my wife would want to explain about it and give me some insight into it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to start cooking, but it gives her a feeling that I have an interest and that I want to know more about her. And aside from helping me to understand her better, it also helps her understand that I care. So that's number one. A proactive thing you can do is show interest in what your partner is interested in their likes and dislikes, and who they are, and engage them on their field of interest. That's one proactive thing. Another proactive thing that you can do is not through talk or through the mind, but through actions. And in this, again, what is real chesed? Real chesed is not saying what I would like to buy. Like my father had a friend one time who always likes to tell this story. He had an office mate that went, and it was his girlfriend's birthday, or it was their anniversary, I don't remember what it was, and he went and bought her a juicer, like a juice maker. And my father said to the guy, or somebody in the office said to the guy, that's not very romantic, a juicer. Like, why would you buy that? And he said, it was very expensive. What do you mean? It's a really expensive juicer. It's really good. That's an example of somebody not necessarily having the other person in mind when they purchase a gift. Unless his significant other loves juice. Yeah. Okay? Now, could be. Could be. Right. Now, could be. So, understanding so these are actions that a person does. What kind of gifts that you give, or creating or sharing in experiences that are meaningful to your spouse. Let's say your spouse likes a certain television show, God forbid if you have a television. Lo aleinu, I'm just saying, for example, if somebody would have that, watching something that they like to watch, or for the husband watching like a Lifetime movie. Of course, it's okay to, let's say, put earplugs in. It's fine. Just make sure she doesn't know. I'm just kidding. That was just a joke. In watching something, sharing an experience, sharing an activity that your spouse finds interesting, even if you yourself may be lukewarm on it or not like it that much, is something you can do to support them in what their interests are. Playing a supportive role to them in the things that matter to them, giving them gifts that matter to them. But again, that's going to be based on number one. Number one is understanding really who they are and what they care about and what they like. And that means you have to be attentive to them to get that. And then you say, what can I do that will that will help them see through my actions that I support them, that I promote what they care about, that I facilitate their enjoyment of it, and that I even partake in it somewhat, even if I might not be as fully interested as they are. So let's say, for example, your spouse really enjoys certain type of music, and they want to go to a concert of that music, and you don't like that music. They like Bruce Springsteen. You like Adele. I can't think of two more different people than that. Okay? Going to a Bruce Springsteen concert might be for you a great sacrifice, but you're participating in something that is meaningful to your spouse. You're sharing it with them. You're showing that you care about them. You're helping them. That's an example of an action you can do, and any kind of chesed that you do that's really related, again, to understanding what that person really needs. And that's true in all areas. Don't give the person a gift or do a chesed for the person that's what you would want. You have to think about what they would want. You have to look at it from their perspective. And in order to do that, you have to understand them. So that's a second thing. So far, the first two items have to do with getting to know your significant other, comprehending what they're about, and either engaging them intellectually or participating in some action, one way or another. Even if it is chesed that relates to, okay, your wife cooks or your husband cooks, helping him out, assisting, buying the ingredients, doing something that can help them pursue what they want to pursue. Maybe in their job they have to take work home at night, helping them out with that. Okay, you might say, hey, it's not my responsibility. But doing chesed that matters in their framework. But now we have another thing, which is common interests. We hope that if you have a friend or you have a spouse, you have at least something, bless you, you have at least something in common. Besides, bless you again. Don't do it again, though. 3 times, it's 3 strikes are out. You have common interests that you're going to share. Now, those common interests, there's no requirement that to be married to somebody you have to have a lot of common interests. That's a misnomer. People always come to me when they are getting ready to get married. Especially guys do this. Never understood this. I met this girl and I like her, but she's not deep philosophically. She doesn't have an extensive Judaic studies background and this. And I said, are you looking for a chavruta or are you looking for a wife? You don't have to be able to do everything together. You don't have to see eye to eye on everything, be able to do everything together. It's nice if you are very intellectual and your spouse has an IQ in the negative numbers, it's probably not a good match. But it doesn't have to be that on every level, on everything you have a shared interest. But some is necessary. You want to be able to share some things. So it's good to cultivate, to find those areas of shared interest. You might not even realize it. You might encounter things along the way if you have an open mind where, hey, I'm interested in this and I notice that my spouse is also interested in this. It's something you want to cultivate. It's something that brings you together. You have shared experiences. Maybe you both enjoy theater, or you both enjoy movies, or you both enjoy whatever it is that you find, or you both enjoy a certain type of game, or you both enjoy a certain type of sport. The beauty of it is on many levels. First of all, because doing activities together is always very positive. You'll know that, I'm sure you already know, that the dates that are best are the dates where you participate in a shared activity. That always is the best. Why? Because people become bonded through shared activity. And even when they try to create harmony among groups, let's say when they try to unite a group, let's say you have a group of new students in school, or they want to have an icebreaker, or they want to create a sense of group identity. One of the things to do is give you a shared activity to work on. A shared activity brings people together. So it's true for spouses as well. It's true for all types of significant others, that sharing an activity is really a bonding experience, number one. Number two, it gives you great memories to share, because you always remember the time that we did this or that we did that. And that might seem like a trite thing, but it's actually a very powerful thing when you have those shared memories. And even better than just a shared memory is you'll have an experience together and say, this reminds me of that play that we saw, that movie that we saw, that experience that we had. So as you experience your life, you're processing it together based on your own shared past experiences. In other words, you're creating history together. Having a history together is, we all have our personal histories that we bring, everything that we experience in the here and now, we filter through our personal histories. Whatever happened in our childhood and our adolescence and our education and our own college, that nobody else had the exact same experience that you had. Everybody had their own unique experience. Nobody's details line up exactly like yours. But you have a shared narrative with a spouse, and that shared narrative in history, the more that you have in common, the more you're able to draw on these shared experiences as you face new challenges, as you experience new things. And it's actually a beautiful thing to be able to draw from, so to speak, the literature of your own story as you address new things. If you think about the way that we draw from the literature of Tanakh, we see a situation, we say, this is a situation of David and Goliath, David and Goliath, or this is a situation of Shaul and David, or this is a situation like the one that so-and-so experienced in the Tanakh. So we draw from the stories of the Tanakh or from the Chumash, from the Parashah, all the time. We bring them to bear on our experiences now. So in the same way, you have your own history and say, you know what, this is just like what happened to us with X, or this is just like the experience we had together in Y. And when you share those experiences, it gives you more of a foundation together. So I think it's beautiful to share experiences for that reason. And I find that many a time, and I'm sure you've all had the same, encountered the same, that you'll find yourselves drawing on things that you've shared together, that have occurred to you together, just like a family does this. We know that families do this within families all the time. Oh, this reminds us of when Uncle Herb did this, that everybody has a history within a family. You have your individual history, and when you have a spouse, you're creating your own history together. You want to share as much as possible so that you can share you can come to a shared understanding of the future things. And so that's a beautiful thing, to try to share as many activities as possible. That doesn't mean that you should dilute your own individuality. One thing we're not talking about tonight is, how do you preserve your individuality when you're bonding with one another? I mean, that's something that you have sort of a mutual responsibility to one another, to give one another space and to promote one another's individuality. That's sort of the first two concepts: understanding the other, helping them succeed and pursue the dreams that are unique to them. But then you have your shared dreams and your shared common experiences and your shared bonding activities that are not one or the other of you, but both of you. Okay, so then the fourth principle, then, of course, is similar to principle number one. Okay, it's kind of I kind of put it the order could have been 1, 2, 4, 3 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4 here, but it doesn't really matter. Is the discussion of shared interests, in other words, and also expectations. This is something extremely important. One of the proactive steps you can take to have a better relationship with anybody is to lay out expectations very clearly. There's a little saying that goes around, or sort of a joke that goes around on the internet sometimes, and I think it was a T-shirt of it, that basically says, basically comments on the fact, I forget exactly how it was phrased, and if I try to relay it without the proper phraseology, it will butcher the joke, so I don't want to ruin it for you. But it's basically to the effect of, a husband can never know all the wife's rules, so he's always in violation of the rules. And it's like rule number 1 is you'll never know all the rules. Rule number 2 is if you don't know why you violated a rule, consult rule number 1, something like that. You'll never know all the rules. So there's a feeling of, there's a lot of things you expect from me and that you want to see from me. I don't even know what they are. So all of a sudden I'm getting yelled at and I didn't even know I did something wrong. It happens to everybody all the time. It happens to children with parents also. I didn't know my parents didn't want me to do X, Y, or Z. So they're telling me now. They're yelling at me now, what we call in Hebrew, b'di'avad. After the fact they're yelling at me, but l'chatchila, and ahead of time I didn't know. On the front end I didn't know. On the back end I'm finding out. Right? So we don't want that to happen. The less that happens, the more proactive you are with sharing expectations. So one of the things that I do with couples that are having problems sometimes is I have them make a sheet. Each one makes a sheet. The wife makes a sheet, and the husband makes a sheet, or the prospective husband and wife, if I'm doing premarital counseling, and I ask each one to put down what are the core expectations you have. What do you expect? What do you think it means to be a wife, and what do you expect of your husband? What do you think it means to be a husband, and what do you expect of your wife? In other words, let's say 5 things. Put down 5 core things, and then we look at them and say, well, look how different your visions are, or what do you mean by this one? What do you mean by that one? It's actually a nice exercise to do. You can even do it, you don't need a therapist to do that. You can do it on your own. Sit down and say, let's play a fun game. I'm going to write down the 5 things that I think are the core expectations of me as a spouse and what my expectations of you, and you do yours, and let's see if ours overlap or to what degree they don't overlap, and then you can discuss it. Say, number 2, you were too vague. What did you mean by being responsible? What did you have in mind on that? That's too vague. Be as specific as possible. So, because everyone will say be responsible as one of them, right? So you have it has to be more specific, but it's very eye-opening because you realize, they're expecting me to be X, Y, and Z, and maybe I'm not always being that. Or maybe I didn't think I was supposed to be that, or I didn't want to be that. So I might have to change myself, or we might have to have a discussion, we might have to compromise. So it's really helpful to lay out on the table what your expectations are. Like, listen, I expect you to take out the garbage. That doesn't have to be one of your core expectations. I'm just saying, that's one of the, when you express expectations in advance, it's always more helpful than doing it after the fact. After the fact means you're criticizing or you're complaining. Before the fact means let's share, what our expectations are. What are our values? What is your dream, Tom? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? What's your dream, Suzanne? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Are they in the same place or in totally different places? Because if it's totally different places, then you might have a problem. If it's the same place, that's a good thing. I'm not just talking about where you want to live. I know everybody wants to make Aliyah and everything. We all want to go to Eretz Yisrael. I'm not asking about that. I mean, spiritually, professionally, personally, where do you expect to be? Okay? One guy says, I expect to be sitting in the kollel and learning and my wife working. The wife says, I expect my husband to be making a lot of money and in the business, and they're not a good match. Or at least they're not on the same page. So you need to have a sense of, one guy's goal is, I want to learn a lot of Torah, and the lady's goal is, I want you to make a lot of money, or vice versa. I'm not necessarily saying the lady's only interested in the money. Maybe the lady wants the Torah and the husband wants to make money. But they have to have a similar concept of where they want to be and what each one's role is going to be. Because if the guy's learning in the kollel, that means the wife is working. Okay, and if the husband's working, that means the wife has to take care of other things. So there is a division of labor, a sense of mutual expectation. And the more it's communicated and discussed, the better. Like, hey, let's sit down and talk. Where do you think we're going to be in 5 years? What do you think is going to be? And this can be a philosophical discussion. It doesn't have to be contentious. Like, so what do you want from me? You're complaining about me all the time. Not that kind of discussion. A general discussion. You get into it about, let's think, what are our values? What do we want to accomplish? What path are we on? Where are we going? Sometimes you discover new things about yourself or about your spouse. Where do they really expect to be in the future? What is really important to them? What are their dreams? What are their hopes? People go to retreats for this too. They go to those couple retreats sometimes. And in the couple retreats, they're very powerful. I've never been on one personally, but the people who've told me have given me, testimonials about their experience. They've been like life-changing experience. They go on these retreats. Actually, a rabbi and his wife told me that they went on it. They weren't really having any problems, but they heard people come back and they were so amazed and so impressed by it that they wanted to see, what is the talk? What is it? So they went on it, and it was amazing because it made them write letters to one another about where they feel that they're good, that they're strong in their in their role as a husband or wife or parent or whatever, and where do they feel that they're weaker. And they wrote it as a letter, so it didn't have to be a discussion, and it was non-confrontational, and each one saw what the other one thought and where they were coming from and what they appreciated about their spouse and where they felt that their spouse was different than what they expected. And so it ended up being a great opportunity to communicate about these expectations and all that. And that wasn't the only thing that they did at the retreat, but that was one of the things. And so it came out that the husband said, I have a hard time, giving positive reinforcement to my kids. I feel like I don't show them love. I only criticize them, and I wish I could do better. It was eye-opening because they had to really think about it. But spouses can do this now. They can think about who do I see myself, what do I see my role as, where do I do well, what don't I do well. The other one can do the same, and they can come to a better understanding. The more communication there is about the fundamentals that you share, the better. The fifth thing, and this seems like out of all these things, the least important, but I think it's extremely important, and that is having meals together, which is, becoming a neglected thing in our society today for two reasons. First of all, because people work hours that are unmanageable, so they're not able to have meals with their family, meals with their children. Most of us, when we were growing up, our parents probably, we had like family dinner at night. Most people, maybe not everyone. Many, or most, I would say, 20, 30 years ago, it was much more common for people to have a sit-down dinner with their family every night. Now it's becoming less and less common because people used to work, 9 to 5 job. They came home at 6 o'clock. They had dinner with their family, and then they went to do whatever. That was the old routine. Now people's work routines are a lot less predictable, a lot less routinized, and therefore it's harder for people to be able to manage that. But it's actually a halachic obligation for a husband. People may or may not know that. I don't know if they taught you that in Chatan class, but it's a halachic obligation for the husband at least to have Shabbat dinner with his wife every week. And if he's not going to have Shabbat dinner with his wife, he needs her permission. That is actually a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, that the husband's supposed to always have Shabbat dinner with his wife, unless she allows him a dispensation. And that shows you that even the halacha is not just a matter of psychology and all this, feel-good stuff that we talk about today. But even the halacha understood the importance of having the bonding over a meal at least once a week as something extremely important. And obviously nowadays we have other ways of avoiding engagement at meals. We have our phone, we have the television on, we have all kinds of distractions going on during mealtime, so people don't genuinely engage. But the power of a meal as a social engager is timeless. I mean, if you look at ancient times till today, what did people bond over? A meal. Look in the Tanakh. When Avimelech comes to visit Yitzchak, what do they do? Or to Abraham, they have a meal. He comes to visit Yitzchak, they have a meal. When Yaakov and Lavan make their treaty or their truce, as you want to call it, they have a meal together. It's always Vayochelu lechem. They eat bread together, and we even have a saying, breaking bread together. The idea that meals are a way of bonding with one another on, it doesn't have to be anything formal, but there's a social and psychological bond that's created through meals where you're really engaged with one another. And it's funny because if you think about it, even today, business meetings, they have lunch. Let's do lunch. They don't say let's just have a meeting. Let's do lunch, or let's do a cup of coffee. Let's talk over a cup of coffee. Why? You need a cup of coffee to talk? When the coffee's in your mouth, you can't talk. Why don't we just have a talk? No, let's have a cup of coffee together. Let's have a lunch together. Why? Because there's a social bonding that goes on when you share a drink together, when you're in a relaxed atmosphere, when you're having food or you're having drink, and it creates a context beyond the discussion itself of a connection between two people. The connection between the two people that they're sharing food, and then the conversation happens on top of that, instead of it just being a conversation in abstract, which is less grounded, but it's less of a connector between the two people. So it's really important to try to foster these social experiences as well, of meals together, of share, just like the shared activities I was talking about before was more like shared experiences, shared collaborative projects and things like that. Here I'm talking about simply being able to have a routine whereby you have a meal every day. Rabbi Beryl Wine writes in his book he has a book about being a pulpit rabbi. It's called Tending the Vineyard. It's a very good one. It's a really good book. It's a book that when I first started out as a pulpit rabbi, I didn't understand it. I was too new to the field. I didn't understand it. But now I reread it like a couple of years ago, and then I understood it. Because then I had the experience to identify with what he was talking about. He talks really about he's a very easy writer to read, and he talks about the whole gamut of pulpit rabbi experience. So one of the things he talks about in there is the beauty of being a pulpit rabbi. The negative is that you're 24/7 on call, and any time you could be called back from vacation, from this, from that, for anything. But he says one of the positive things about his daily routine is he has lunch with his wife every day. In other words, you have some, as crazy as a rabbi's schedule is, there's a certain flexibility that he's not 9 to 5 at a desk in an office. And inevitably, his place of work is close to his house. Because he has to be able to walk to the synagogue, right? So he always is within walking distance of his office. And he doesn't have a 9 to 5 job. He has a lunch in the middle of the day. He can walk back to his house, have lunch, and walk back to the office. So he says having lunch with your wife every day is one of the perks of being a shul rabbi. He doesn't say it's the only one, but it might be. Because otherwise you have to work on Shabbat, you have to work on holidays, there's a lot of other problems. But that was one of the things that he says. And I think that speaks to the value of sharing meals, sharing that kind of an experience with your spouse is a way to bond. So, to recap, we have 5 things There's an old saying that you should never teach more than 3 points in a lecture, right?
So point number 8.
Right. So point number 6 is you're only supposed to teach 3 points, but we had 5. So let's review them and put them in. But they really collapse into 3. You'll see, because we're looking at 2 different dimensions. We're looking at the dimension of thought and the dimension of action. So in the dimension of thought or conversation, you have 2 kinds of thought conversation goals if you're looking for proactive ways to enrich a relationship. Number 1 is getting to know and understand and identify with the thoughts and the values and the interests and the hobbies and et cetera, of your partner. Okay? The other thought and intellectual related and discussion related component is your shared expectations or your mutual expectations or your mutual values. Hey, I really think going to a good college is important. Hey, I don't really think that's important. What's important is that you have good Torah values and good Jewish values. You go to good yeshiva. Whatever college you go to, as long as it pays the bills, it doesn't make a difference. You could argue for either of those 2 sides. Okay, either of them. Some people will say, yeah, that's true. It doesn't matter what college you go to. You get the same job anyway, or no job. And what's important is the Torah. And no one says, no, Torah is something that's a lifelong thing. It doesn't really matter. What's important is the college. You can argue about that. So that's something where you have differences of opinion, and you want to understand, well, what is our expectation? Where is our child going to end up when in school? Where are we going to put our children in school? What kind of values are we going to teach in the home? What kind of community do we want to be a part of? All of these things come out of your mutual values, expectations, interests, etc., etc. So you have individual interests, interest and hobbies and so on, likes and dislikes, and you have the ones that you have to come to a common understanding of, that you have to share with one another. What are your expectations of one another? The husband has a concept of what a good wife is and what a good husband is. The wife has a concept of what a good wife is and what a good husband is. Do they match up or do they not? Because if there's dissonance, then everyone's going to be unhappy. Because the husband thinks he's supposed to be X and the wife thinks he's supposed to be Y. And vice versa. The wife thinks she's supposed to be X and the husband thinks she's supposed to be Y. You're going to have all kinds of miscommunication and problems. So these 2 items are really under one heading, which is discussion and understanding of each individual and mutually. Number 2 is in the realm of action. So in the realm of action, you have activities that are geared at promoting, validating, if you will, validating, promoting, addressing the interests, the idiosyncrasies, the hobbies, the whatevers of your partner. And then you have those activities that bring you together, that you're going to share together, the common activities, the activities that you find are a common interest, that you both enjoy, that you're both enriched equally from, that it's not for her that we went to that play, it's not for him that we went to that play, it's because we both like the play, we both like we both like Shakespeare, or whatever. So we both like to do it, or we both like to go to lectures by so-and-so, or at wherever. So, one of the things I used to do, because, I got married really young, and Alana and I know each other from high school. So when I was in college, if I had a really good professor, I would bring Alana to sit in. We didn't go to the same school, but I would bring her to sit in, my lecture, because I was like, you have to hear this professor. I want us to have this. So, we were in the same field, studying the same field. So for the most part, we had a lot of common interests, in terms of our academics. So we would share this experience. She would enjoy it, and I would enjoy it, and it was something we could talk about. So that's an example. People want to share something they're excited about, and especially if they know it's a common interest. Because if it's a common interest and you're excited about it, then all the more so you're going to be bonded through it. So those are the 2 planes that we're looking at, not planes like airplane. 2 dimensions that we're looking at. One is the understanding. The other one is the action. Individual, mutual. And then finally, the meals, which are like a common activity, but they're not an activity that's goal-oriented in the same way as, let's say, going to some specific form of entertainment or going to play a sport or doing some project. We're just talking about the daily routine or the weekly routine of having meals and trying to stay connected and to feel bonded through that. Because if you're not sharing meals together, you're just sharing a home at the end of the day that you both collapse exhausted at the end of the day, then you don't really feel like you're living a life together in your house. You can lack that anchor, just like if you had a business meeting without a cup of coffee or without a lunch meeting. Lunch meetings, coffee meeting, it makes you feel like you are bonding together and having this discussion as brothers, so to speak, as members of a group, not just as two individuals. So it's a powerful way of uniting people. And so I think these are the 5 points which really can be summarized in 3 points. So it's legitimate for the 3-point rule. Yeah.